Hey everyone, welcome to the Dr. Josh Axe Show. I am your host, Dr. Axe, and each and every week on this show, we explore the science and principles behind how to grow in body, mind, spirit, and take your health and your life to the next level. You know, there is a common saying that we heard as we went through the COVID pandemic, and it was this: follow the science. This is a common phrase that we've heard that's been promoted by people. Often, though, it's been authorities with flawed or ulterior motives. And one of the figures who said this over and over again was Anthony Fauci, and along with other government agencies and officials. And the thing that I've covered this in the past, but I wanted to cover this again, is that there were things that, we have to learn from history. If we don't learn from our pasts, we're going to repeat the same mistakes over and over again in the future. And that's part of wisdom. If you want to be considered a wise person, if you want true wisdom, then you have to learn from mistakes of the past. And part of that is learning who to trust, learning who to listen to. And I'm going to go through 10 examples on this show of how we were deceived and what you should believe or look out for in the future. So I think you're going to learn a tremendous amount from this episode. And I typically don't like to talk about individuals negatively, but I thought this would be a good time for me to go through what we've learned in the past so we can make better decisions on who to trust in the future. And it's important to question narratives and do your own research. And so you can do additional research to what I'm going to share with you today, but I'm going to dive into Dr. Anthony Fauci in particular, who is often portrayed as a leading authority in infectious diseases and was involved in numerous controversies throughout his career. I'm going to go through everything from the AIDS crisis to the COVID-19 pandemic and how this doctor repeatedly made statements that later proved to be false or misleading, raising serious concerns about his credibility and motives. For example, in June of 2021, Fauci said, quote, "Attacks on me, quite frankly, are attacks on science. All of the things I've spoken about consistently from the very beginning have been fundamentally based on science. Sometimes those things were inconvenient truths for people." So as we look back on real science and evidence, now that we have the facts, we're going to see if Dr. Fauci followed the science and ethics or whether those were ignored. So let's dive into the 10 most prominent examples of potential misconduct. The first is we're going to go all the way back to the AIDS crisis. Dr. Anthony Fauci was really leading the charge, was the head spokesperson of the focus and research on HIV and AIDS, and he strongly supported the use of something called AZT, zidovudine, which was a drug for AIDS. It was a treatment for AIDS. Despite evidence of its toxicity and questionable benefits, this led critics to argue that his support was financially motivated due to the drug's profitability, which he was directly tied to. Now, Dr. Fauci also initially opposed the use of prophylactic treatments for opportunistic infections in HIV, a stance activists claim caused thousands of unnecessary deaths, appearing more bureaucratically driven than scientifically. And we've seen this a lot throughout his career. It's more bureaucratic and less scientific. Additionally, Fauci suggested early on that HIV could be transmitted through casual household contact, which incited widespread panic and fear and the stigmatism of HIV positive individuals before this misinformation was corrected. I personally remember this when I was younger, this big scare and stigmatism and panic going on around this that he was really leading the charge of. Now, number two example of Dr. Fauci misleading the public or not going based purely on science is his mask guidance in flip-flopping during COVID. Now, initially, Fauci advised against the use of masks by the general public. He said they were totally unnecessary. However, later he reversed his guidance, stating that masks were crucial for preventing viral transmission based on no medical research. Fauci later admitted that the initial guidance was intended to preserve mask supplies for healthcare workers only, revealing a deliberate attempt to mislead the public. Number 3 example of misguidance was herd immunity threshold manipulation. Fauci repeatedly shifted his statements on the percentage of the population needed to achieve herd immunity, initially citing 60 to 70% before then adjusting, saying, well, now, no, it needs to be 70 to 85%. And it was crazy because you saw the vaccine rates were right there. So then he said, well, no, it needs to be higher in order to push those rates higher. Again, it wasn't based on science. It was based on his connection and opinion to pharmaceutical companies. He later admitted to manipulating these figures based on what he believed the public was willing to accept rather than on scientific evidence. So some of these things we see he even admitted to. Number 4, gain of function research denial. Under oath, Anthony Fauci denied that the NIH funded gain of function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. At a Senate hearing in May, Dr. Fauci said the NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain of function research in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. That was under oath, under testimony before God. However, later on, the NIH principal deputy director in writing directly contradicted it, saying this was not true, and they do. Again, these later documents have revealed that NIH does indeed fund this research, directly contradicting his testimony under oath, raising serious concerns about his honesty and integrity. So think about this. Again, he under oath said it does not, it never does. And he's in the know. And yet it does, we find, sometime later. The reason I'm bringing this up is because lives have been lost. And I am a healthcare practitioner that wants to help save lives in the future. It's why I got into this industry in the first place. And so this is very, very important to know. If you have somebody that lies under oath before God and before government officials again and again and again, knowing we can't trust that person or people like him in the future. Number 5 is this lab leak denial. In February of 2023, Dr. Fauci said, we must all keep an open mind to all possibilities about the origins of the coronavirus, before saying this just was not the case at all. And then he came and started saying, well, we may never know the source of the outbreak. He said, I don't see any data for the lab leak. Well, to this day, Fauci lies that there is no data to show the Wuhan lab in China is responsible for the origins of COVID-19. Again, Fauci has developed a habit of lying to protect himself. And here's what's happened and what's come out now since then. Multiple federal agencies, including the U.S. Department of Energy, as well as the FBI, have officially declared that they have confidence that the COVID-19 pandemic was caused by a lab leak in Wuhan, China. An FBI director, Christopher Wray, did not mince words on the topic when he said, the FBI has for quite some time now assessed that the origins of the pandemic are most likely a potential lab incident in Wuhan. Number 6 example of misleading the public when it comes to the COVID pandemic. Number 6 is the downplay of natural immunity. Despite numerous studies showing that natural immunity provides strong protection against COVID-19, Anthony Fauci consistently downplayed its importance, insisting that vaccination was the only viable plan to herd immunity. Now, this position ignored substantial scientific evidence to the contrary, and this is one where he was absolutely wrong on, and he led people astray. Number 7, COVID-19 vaccines are supremely effective. Here were his initial statements about the vaccine. Dr. Fauci and other public health officials initially suggested that COVID-19 vaccines would prevent both symptomatic illness and transmission of the virus itself. Fauci himself stated in multiple interviews that vaccinated individuals would not become symptomatic and that the vaccine would help stop the spread of COVID. Here's what happened in reality. As time passed, it became clear that while vaccines reduce the severity of illness and decrease potential hospitalization, they do not prevent infection or transmission. And breakthrough cases in vaccinated individuals led to a reevaluation of the vaccine's capabilities. And we found that it wasn't effective again at spreading, and it wasn't very effective necessarily at reducing symptoms either, but the spread was an absolute. And Fauci's initial overstatement of vaccine efficacy misled the public about what vaccines could realistically do and achieve, because he was trying to push that agenda, of which he has financial connections. Number 8, natural treatments and even non-natural treatments like hydroxychloroquine. Now, early in the pandemic, there was a significant debate about the use of hydroxychloroquine as a potential treatment for COVID-19. Now, Fauci and the NIH were highly skeptical and called for more rigorous studies. Although subsequent research showed mixed results and hydroxychloroquine was largely dismissed, there were studies and anecdotal reports suggesting that there were potential benefits, especially when used early in the course of the disease. Now, Fauci's categorical dismissal of hydroxychloroquine ignored these potential positive outcomes, leading to accusations of bias and censorship of alternative viewpoints. Do you remember people like Dr. Robert Malone and Peter McCullough? I'm talking about thousands and thousands of medical doctors who were canceled, who were banned, who were shunned by their community, some who even lost their license simply because they spoke out about some of this. Number 9, financial conflicts of interest. Did you know that Dr. Fauci had royalties, patents, and benefited financially from this COVID pandemic? Fauci has been linked to patents and has received royalties related to drugs and vaccines. This financial connection raises questions about whether his public health recommendations are influenced by personal financial interests rather than purely scientific evidence. In fact, his own net worth went from something like $7.5 million to $11 million. I mean, if you look at it as a percentage, that's like probably a 75% increase in his own net worth through the pandemic. And so obviously there's a lot of conflicts of interest around that. You know, here's the other thing. His financial disclosures reveal that Fauci has investments in pharmaceutical companies, biotechnology companies, and that he saw a massive increase in his financial portfolio during the pandemic. And the number 10 area where Dr. Fauci misled the public was on nutrition and health advice. Dr. Fauci previously stated that when you go through a virus that you should take, or to prevent a virus, nutrients like vitamin D, vitamin C, and zinc are important to maintaining a healthy immune system. For instance, he acknowledged himself before this, vitamin D is something that he takes for his own immune support. However, during the COVID-19 pandemic, he downplayed the potential role of these vitamins, saying there's no evidence they could be effective against viruses like COVID-19, despite emerging studies suggesting very early on that adequate levels of vitamin D might reduce the severity of the disease, and never came out and said that. So there's an example, another example of this contradictory advice where he had said something before where he might not see benefit when he knew financially that, if people start going and saying, well, I'm going to go and take vitamin D and C and zinc and quercetin and elderberry and nattokinase and echinacea and ginger and these things that have been used historically to fight viruses, well, then people may not go and get the shot. They may not go and take a medication or get on a ventilator, these things that he was connected to himself. And I want to say this, I want to give grace to people. Listen, if somebody makes a mistake, and they were good intention, that happens. And then they decide to learn from their mistake and they then change their ways in the future. I forgive, I move on, I have compassion, I have empathy for those people, and I forgive and I'll listen to them again. If they're an expert, if they've proven to be an expert. But what's happened in this case is you have an expert that has lied and misled and done it for 50 some years in their career, everything from the AIDS pandemic in the 80s to the COVID pandemic in 2019 to 2020 and beyond. And so it's important to understand that if you are going to have wisdom yourself, you need to think critically, you need to question official narratives, and do your own research. Don't blindly trust those in power, regardless of their credentials or titles. Here's another principle I want to repeat. By their fruits, you will recognize them. If somebody is showing a lack of integrity and misleading you, don't continue to listen to them. For myself, I love listening to people like Dr. Mark Hyman, Vani Hari, Jordan Rubin, Will Cole, Dr. Christopher Motley. These are people that have a lot of integrity. They have a lot of wisdom, and they may have some financial interest with supplements, but with food recommendations and lifestyle and fighting disease, they typically don't. And so following people that have high character, they've got great spiritual beliefs, they have faith, they have great values, great families. Those people that have that sort of integrity, listen to those people. Remember that. Remember this principle. By your fruits, you will recognize them. Follow the science, the real science. Also follow God, follow values, follow virtue, follow people of high character, and that will lead you to the truth. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Dr. Josh Axe Show, where each and every week I dive deep into the principles and science behind how to grow in body, mind, spirit, and take your health and your life to the next level. I hope you enjoyed this episode. My goal in this show is to bring you the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So help me God. That is my goal. And so most of the time we're positive. I hope this didn't seem too negative, but I really wanted to take the time to reveal and help you learn from the past as I have, so we can have more wisdom and make better decisions in the future. Hey, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, like, and share it. Listen, millions of people were misled, and they need to know the truth. And so would you do me a favor? Help share this. Go on social media and share this. Text it to somebody. Help me spread the word that we need to have wisdom when it comes to our health and the health of our family if we're going to thrive here in the future. By the way, and if you subscribe to the show, I get to bring on better guests. People like the Vani Haris and the Will Coles and the Dr. Mark Hymans and the other experts in the future, the Carrie Underwoods that I've had on the show and others. And so make sure to subscribe here. Let me know what you think of the show. And I can't wait to see you for the next episode.